Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers. Tonight, the Georgia House and Senate remain in session at this hour. We're still expecting action on assisted suicide. Long-awaited criminal justice reform passes the state Senate with amendments. Those changes will send the bill back to the House. Part of Governor Nathan Deal's legislative priorities, the measure would create drug courts and seek to reduce the prison population by using more diversion and treatment programs for nonviolent offenders. The controversial measure limiting abortions after 20 weeks could be dead for the session, according to House Speaker David Ralston. Yesterday, the Senate amended the bill to allow for abortions when pregnancy was deemed medically futile, a change the House isn't willing to accept. Final passage comes to the FY 2013 budget, the big budget. The $19.3 billion spending bill adds hundreds of millions for higher education and economic development. Georgia welfare and food stamp recipients will have to submit to drug testing under legislation passed by the Senate today. Opponents say the measure is unconstitutional. And we're nearing the end of the session. The House and Senate are working hard to move legislation through before sine die. During these busy last few days, things can get confusing. And that's why I'll be joined on set tonight by Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report and the AJC's political insider, Jim Galloway. The deans of the Capitol Press Corps will put everything in perspective for us. For Tuesday, March 27, 2012, the 39th legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly, this is Primetime Lawmakers. Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers, GPB's nightly coverage of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Let's go live to the Capitol where Sasha Horn reports the Senate has passed the criminal justice reform bill.
Scott, reforming the state's criminal justice system has been a top priority for lawmakers. This past summer, a joint committee combed through current laws and consulted with police, judges, and attorneys to see what areas needed improvement. Now, today, the Senate voted unanimously to pass the measure with a focus on strengthening penalties for violent criminals and saving tax dollars.
If we'd made some policy changes, we could save an anticipated $264 million over the next 5 years, and we could do it by increasing public safety, and the way to get there is to focus on property offenses and low-level drug offenders who are increasingly being placed in jail.
The Senate also added an amendment that clarifies the House's version of the bill dealing with burglaries.
We also looked at the burglary statute in Georgia, which was a driver of our prison population. That statute currently only has 1 degree of burglary. We decided that there are more serious burglaries if, for example, if you enter into somebody's home, which in the law is called a dwelling, that is a more serious offense than if you burglarize a shed that is empty in the backyard or a vacant building where nobody resides.
Now, in the end, a total of 7 amendments passed, including that burglary statute. 4 failed, and because of those changes, it goes back to the House for their consideration. And another big bill that's got a lot of controversy was testing for benefits. It was heavily debated in both chambers, and today the Senate majority stripped a bill that would require that law enforcement reports drug arrests to the Department of Human and Health Services, and instead they substituted in language from that controversial testing for benefits bill. Now, Senate Democrats have been extremely outspoken. They knew they didn't have the vote, so their strategy was to go in and add amendments, and they did just that.
I have an amendment that is before you on your desk, amendment number 4, an amendment in an effort to in some way mitigate the onslaught of this bill, which I find, frankly, to be, if you want to look for a low point in the legislative session this year, this is a strong competitor for a low point. And that is a bill that beats up on the little people. A bill that demonizes folks who are at the very bottom of the income strata in our state and who are participating in a national, federally funded program, temporary assistance to needy families.
Over the past several weeks, both House and Senate Democrats argued TANF receives nearly all of its funding from the federal level. Passing this bill, they say, won't save the state money. In all, Senate Democrats introduced 5 amendments. All 5 were voted down by the majority. The lone amendment to pass came from the bill's author, Senator John Alberts.
Throughout this process, we worked very closely with all parties with special needs, disabilities, those in nursing homes, and the elderly to make sure that we were exempting the proper people throughout this process. And I want to thank each one of those groups for working so closely with us. If you look at Amendment number 6, this adds some additional language with some community-based services, specifically in the non-Medicaid homes. This is a good amendment to the bill, and it is the only one as the author that I will be supporting at this time.
Now, because that amendment was added, the bill will go back to the House for their consideration. Now, another measure that was debated in the Senate today is a bill that would make it a felony to flee police in a chase. Now, we've talked about that a lot, but it is now on its way to the governor's desk for final passage after passing the Senate today. And another big issue down here at the state capitol is cutting unnecessary government spending. It's been a big issue in both chambers. Now today, senators passed what they're calling the so-called sunset bill. And what it does is eliminate unnecessary government spending by over time trying to cut back on those agencies by appointing a committee to evaluate the agencies in 3 categories: productivity, efficiency, and responsiveness. Now the bill's sponsor, Senator Judson Hill, says they've made several changes to the House's version.
The legislators who represent the people of this state should step in and look at possible ways to consolidate, privatize, or eliminate certain programs. The difference between the House and the Senate version I applaud, and that's to do one thing. It adds the 2 members of the minority party to the legislative committees to guarantee that they are represented there, and so there's a House and Senate member too of this small committee that would be appointed, as well as 2 floor leaders, one from the House and the Senate.
Now that bill, because of those changes, goes back to the House for their considerations. And Scott, more than 60 bills was on the Senate's calendar today for debate. Last time I checked, they had about a dozen left. They're still in session right now. Scott?
Another long night like last night. Thanks, Sasha.
Long night.
Governor Nathan Deal announced today that he signed into law the bill to further expand the ban of synthetic marijuana. Chase's Law, named for a Georgia teenager who drowned while under the influence of synthetic marijuana, was given final passage by the Senate yesterday. The law expands the list of controlled substances to include chemical compounds that could be used to make any future variations of the substance. And now a reminder about the Lawmakers broadcast schedule for the rest of the week. The General Assembly will be in recess tomorrow, no doubt resting up for Sine Die on Thursday. That means we'll be taking a break too. On Sine Die, the final day of the session, primetime Lawmakers will be back with our regular 7 p.m. broadcast, but that won't be the end of our coverage. We'll return to the air from 11 p.m. to the moment of Sine Die shortly before or after midnight with live House and Senate coverage and analysis of the all-important final day. Then on Friday night at 7, it's our legislative wrap-up show. I'll be joined for in-depth analysis by Sandra Parrish, Tom Crawford, Aaron Haynes, and Jem Galloway, some of the best Capitol reporters around. That's 3 Sine Die shows, Thursday at 7 and 11, and Friday at 7. Primetime Lawmakers is your source for in-depth Capitol news and day-to-day developments in the Georgia General Assembly. Now I'll be joined all through tonight's program by the Georgia Report's Tom Crawford and the AJC's political insider Jem Galloway. As we set things up for Sine Die, day 39, you can argue, is almost as important because an awful lot of things get done, get left on the table, get swept out the door, do they not, Tom?
That is correct. We saw the abortion bill, if not dead, certainly in very serious medical condition right now because the Senate and the House dug in their heels on their different versions of it, and Speaker Ralston said, well, the Senate's being so stubborn, I guess we're just not going to appoint a conference committee to work out a compromise here.
We'll talk a little more about that later, but Jim, the Senate did take some action on criminal justice reform. Will the changes they made be viable in the House?
Absolutely. This is, I think, the governor's premier program, you would say, of the session. They're just making sure that all the dots are above the I's and all the T's have crosses.
Does the bill hit the governor's goal of reducing the prison population?
Tom, jump in if you think differently. I don't think it goes as far as he wanted in terms of cost savings, but I think he'll take what he can get.
And I think certainly it will, by diverting at least some people into accountability courts and into drug courts and alternative treatment, it will cut down on the prison population a little bit.
It'll be very interesting to see finally how they deal with drug offenders. That's been one of the sticking points, one of the real discussion points about this. One other thing very quickly, drug testing for benefits, TANF especially, passes the Senate today with some controversy and the threat of a constitutional challenge later, the Fourth Amendment.
Well, a very similar law was passed in Florida. It was tossed out by a federal court judge down there. the Democratic minority is making the point that that'll happen here as well. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but certainly there will be some legal challenges to it.
And since the way this thing was set up, Jim, it's got to go back to the House, right? Drug testing for benefits before it's done. I think.
I'm not sure. I don't.
There's one or two small changes.
Well, there was that one
things.
amendment from the amendment from Albert, so it does go back. The one thing that adjustment that they have made in there is that it doesn't involve urine samples. It will involve a swab of the subject of the inside of the mouth, and they say that will only cost $17. Democrats are saying it'll cost far more, and that the state's going to have to reimburse each of those costs if they come up clean.
Okay, thanks. We're going to get you back at the end of the program. A lot to talk about tonight. We go back to the Capitol, where primetime lawmaker Sandra Parrish reports there's word the bill with stricter limits on late-term abortions may be dead for the session. Sandra.
That's right, Scott. We were led to believe late this afternoon from Speaker David Ralston when he announced there would be no conference committee on this bill. But it started when the bill last night was successfully amended by Senator John Bullock that many say was a death knell for that measure.
We're talking about that fetus cannot survive. It's incompatible with life. Now, you can put all kind of words in there and say that it can't have this or it's got to have this, but when it's incompatible with life, that means that it's not going to survive. Now, I think that still needs to be a choice that a doctor and his or her patient, should be able to have that decision to still look at even after 20 weeks.
The House balked at the amendment and disagreed with the changes. Then later today, word from Speaker Ralston that no conference committee would be appointed to work out the differences.
The chair is not of the opinion that the Senate has the resolve at this time to deal with this bill, and so at this point there will not be a committee on conference appointed.
But even the Speaker wouldn't say the measure is done for the session.
I wouldn't say it's dead, but we're going to need to see a real indication from the Senate that they're willing to engage in a meaningful way with us on this issue, and if they're not, then I don't think it would be productive to appoint conferees to deal with this issue if it's going to be futile. If it's not going to lead to some significant legislation.
Dan Becker with Georgia Right to Life isn't ready to give up either.
I think the bill is still in progress. It's politics as usual down here under the Capitol, and we're very, very hopeful that we're going to see a good, solid pro-life piece of legislation come out of this session.
But he too opposes the Senate changes.
We believe it was death for disabilities. I mean, it's a terrible thing to introduce a eugenic element into our medical code. A medically futile pregnancy is a new term and one that we're not at all clear on. And its implications are wide-ranging and very broad, and we need to look at it to assure that we have the strongest protection both for the mother, the baby, and the doctors.
Now it's a wait-and-see game as to whether the bill comes back up before midnight on Thursday. Both the House and Senate today signed off on the conference committee report for the $19.3 billion 2013 budget. The governor revised the revenue estimate to include $100 million from the multi-state mortgage fraud settlement.
Out of $800 million given to Georgia, $99 million of that actually comes to the state of Georgia for us to use of those fraud settlement funds. And you'll see under 1611-2, dealing with REBA, a major investment of $67 million there. And under 1 Georgia, 1641, you'll see about $44 million there. And that's where most of that money goes to. So just want to let you know that we feel like, and the governor feels like, that an employed Georgian, whether they've been through a financial crisis or might be right on the teetering edge of going into a financial crisis dealing with their home, if they're employed, and that's what this money goes directly to do, is bring jobs and business and industry to this state, if they're employed, they're in a much more secure position than they would be otherwise.
Senator Jack Hill explained in the Senate that the budget also includes money for more technical colleges.
Restored $1 million to the technical college for cuts to the technical college system. Technical college system has been under some duress because of almost a perfect storm of reductions in the Hope Grant and some effects from transitioning into the semester program has caused some problems with enrollment there. So we felt like that $1 million would be well spent in keeping those colleges going and keeping them serving the students of the state.
Also included is $130 million for new college construction projects at Georgia Tech, Georgia Gwinnett College, and UGA. Money was also restored for 10 additional days for Georgia pre-K students after the school year was reduced by 20 last year. The measure passed unanimously in the Senate. The House passed it 143 to 24. Another bill we're awaiting word as to whether the House will agree to Senate changes is one that sets up the funding mechanism for state-approved charter schools. The Senate passed the bill late into last night.
Can you imagine a scenario where if we told all the schools in the state, by the way, next year you're going to be at the funding level of the lowest 5%, they would be up here with pitchforks and torches ready to tear this place to shreds. But we're telling these schools that they do, in fact, have to operate at the lowest 5%. So the notion that somebody's going to get rich off this is you cannot say on one hand that the current schools are underfunded and then say on the other hand that the bottom 5% are overfunded. I mean, that doesn't make any logical sense.
Now, a constitutional amendment to allow voters to decide in November if the state can approve charter schools has already passed both chambers. A bill we'll be seeing coming up later this evening in the House is one dealing with immigration reform. But the bill by Senator Barry Loudermilk no longer contains language that would have barred undocumented students from attending any of the state's public colleges and universities, a sticking point that Loudermilk himself says was holding it up. The change keeps alive two other aspects of the bill regarding documentation.
Every time that you apply for government benefit, which includes a professional license, let's say a nurse's license, you have to prove that you're an American citizen or you're here legally. Your citizenship doesn't change. Well, the way the law is right now is when you renew your license, let's say in 2 years, to renew a nursing license, you have to prove your citizenship all over again. So it places a burden not only on the recipient of the benefit, but also on the government itself. This bill which simply says, once you've verified your status with an agency, you never have to do it again. There are consulates here in Georgia that will issue a passport to someone who's already here. So hypothetically, and I think it's, in reality, someone who has illegally entered into the country could go to consulate and get a passport. What the document that we're saying has to accompany the passport is given at the border by Immigration Services to verify that immigration saw the passport as the person entered into the country. So it's basically saying, yes, they had a passport when they crossed into this country, a valid passport.
Loudermilk also says the bill will be amended to include birth certificates as a valid form of ID that could be used by illegal immigrants to obtain marriage licenses or establish services such as water or sewer. With no ethics legislation passing this year, conservative groups, including the Atlanta Tea Party and Common Cause Georgia, are looking to candidates to do the job next year. They're being asked to sign a pledge that they will sponsor legislation that would limit lobbyist gifts to $100 per event.
Our goal throughout this is to try to get as many candidates as possible to sign this pledge. Our group in particular, Common Cause Georgia, doesn't advocate for or against any candidates. But it is our goal to see as many candidates in the races out there as possible sign this pledge. And we do plan to communicate to voters who has signed it and who has not, with the hopes of getting all candidates to sign on this.
The group expressed disappointment that a bill to create a study committee on ethics reform and accountability was drastically changed in the Senate Rules Committee to no longer include citizens on the panel or the bill's sponsor, Senator Josh McCoon. Scott?
Hey, thank you, Sandra. And now a reminder, there's much more video and information available on our website. Extended interviews, complete shows, and live House and Senate streams available at gpb.org/lawmakers. You can like Primetime Lawmakers on Facebook and keep up with Capitol News before we go to air as well. Online or off, Primetime Lawmakers is your source for all the news under the Gold Dome. We'll take a short break on Primetime Lawmakers, but don't go anywhere. Much more to come. Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report, the AJC's Jim Galloway will rejoin me for legislative analysis and headlines around the state coming up next. We'll be right back. And now, primetime lawmakers Jackie Britton joins us live from the Capitol with other headlines from around the state. What's going on this evening, Jackie?
Thanks, Scott. Here are your state headlines for tonight. A judge in Lumpkin County is resigning amidst an ethics investigation looking into whether or not she improperly sought to help a man who was convicted of methamphetamine trafficking. The Judicial Qualifications Commission said today that Enola Superior Court Judge Lynn Alderman will resign on Friday. Alderman is the second judge in the circuit to resign recently after Judge David Barrett, who pulled out a handgun to make a point to a witness, left the court last month. And Georgia hikers and outdoorsmen beware going into tick season. The Wall Street Journal reports that this season could be horrific. The number of tick-borne illnesses is on the rise, and researchers say it's because of people moving into areas where animal hosts such as deer, mice, and squirrels are abundant and tick population is high. For tips on tick prevention, check out this story at gpb.org/news. For more information on these and other stories, visit www.gpb.org/news. That will do it tonight for your state headlines. Scott, will send it back to you.
Thanks very much, Jackie. The scourge of a big acorn crop and the white-footed mouse, responsible for the big uptick in ticks. It's time now for our Reporter Roundtable, where we tap our stable of the best political journalists in the state. I'm joined once again for the Georgia Reports, Tom Crawford, and AJC political insider Jim Galloway. More than you wanted to know about the tick population, more than likely. Well, this is an informative program. This is educational TV. Let's dig into some of the things that are left here. First of all, tax reform still has to be resolved, right, before things become final. Tom, you want to start with that? Will the House swallow the changes?
Yeah. They will have a version to send to Governor Deal, and he'll sign it, so that's pretty well taken care of. And it's kind of an odd collection of provisions that they have in the tax bill, and I'm not sure you could call it broad sweeping tax reform, but there are some changes in there that I think a lot of Georgians will like.
And I'm sorry, I stepped in with that because it is passed finally and gone to the governor now, correct?
Right,
yeah.
right. And the biggest portion of that is the most, I hate to use the word radical, but the most radical portion is the internet sales tax, is searching out those new monies for internet sales made to Georgia consumers. We're going to see. The thing about this bill is there are numbers out there about how much money this is going to raise. I think the first year is a $53 million tax cut, supposedly, but nobody really knows. And it's going to take about 3 years for people to really get a sense of what these tax changes have made.
Now, Roger Tutterow was the Mercer economist who was part of the original tax council, was on with us last night, reminding us the original goal for tax reform was to find a way to cut and eventually eliminate the state income tax to make Georgia more competitive. Do we start eating around the edges on that?
Well, they made some changes on the margins by increasing the income tax exemption for married couples. But as far as changing the rate, no change.
Corporate income tax?
Corporate income tax is unchanged.
Is unchanged?
Sure.
And that was a deal priority during his campaign.
But they do get the manufacturer's credits. They get the energy sales tax.
That was the big one.
So we may have some announcements pretty soon of some new big companies coming. We've heard of two. They're thinking about it.
Right, and there was one big announcement with Caterpillar just before the bill passed. So yeah, there could be some things in the works there.
Other issues still in the bubble, abortion, changing the law to mandate abortions, no abortions after 20 weeks. And the Senate injecting the language about allowing an exception for medically futile pregnancies.
Those are situations where when a doctor has determined that the baby will not be able to survive outside the womb, rather than force the woman to carry it to full term, go ahead and perform the procedure then.
The House and the Senate dug in their heels on this, haven't they, Jim?
Well, there's some interesting strategizing going on here. During the Senate debate yesterday, Renee Unterman, who carried the 954 in the Senate, she got up there in the well and she said, if you make any changes to this bill, then you're essentially voting to kill it, because once it goes back to the House, then it gets lost in the negotiations. Well, the Senate made two significant changes. 13 Republicans joined them, specifically Amendment number 9, the medically futile amendment was the one. And then they sent it back to the House. Ralston is now in the position of saying, no, we passed the most conservative version of this bill, and the Senate has blinked on this. We're not going to blink. This gets into election year politics, because you have groups like Georgia Right to Life, which has become very aggressive on the issue, throwing up primary opponents to Republican lawmakers.
But they will be able to preserve their original votes like this, right? At least they'll be able to say, hey, I voted this way without the bill actually becoming law, right?
Right. The votes are on the record. They will be put up in scorecards. Everybody will be made very aware of them. So yes.
Jim, is it done? Is this the
well,
changing
the
abortion
thing
bill
is,
done?
the thing is, the amendment that Dan Becker was so upset with was a recorded vote. Lawmakers can't take that back. It is on the record. And now to back down, that would be futile.
Criminal justice reform, as we mentioned earlier, looks like it's on its way to passage. This is what the governor wants. He wants to find a way to spend less money on locking people up in Georgia. Juvenile justice reform, though, had much higher hopes, a much longer pedigree of work on it behind the scenes. Is it going anywhere? Is it done?
It's gone. In fact, the word got out Monday that it had been shut down, I think because of concerns from the governor's office about the cost. Because they're dealing with so many unknowns from the tax revision bill, as we just discussed, and the cost implications also of criminal justice. They had been getting some pushback on the juvenile justice rewrite, so they just said, we don't want to mess with that this year because there's just too many other issues we've got to deal with first.
Jim?
Well, it did not show up on the last Senate calendar put out by the Rules Committee today, and that was the notice that this wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, big things that are left. I'll go to each of you for 20 or 30 seconds or so. Tom, Sine Die Day is coming. We're going to see a huge backlog of local legislation, or are things going to be nice and smooth?
Well, it's never nice and smooth, but it'll be busy, and there are still a few bills knocking around out there. You were reporting the immigrants bill, which they took out the part that would have ejected undocumented students from the colleges, but there's still some changes to the immigration law that actually might help some people out. So that'll still be out there to be decided.
Jim, tell us something we don't know. What are we looking for?
There's two bills to watch. SB 469, that's the bill that would ban union picketing and union picketing only at private residences. That will come up tonight. There's also HB 347. That's the big that is a big unknown. The unemployment benefits bill that the state needs to help repay. I think $780 million borrowed during the Great Recession. They intend to do it by slashing unemployment benefits in the future, and that's going to be up for debate.
There will be some drama then on day 40. It sounds like.
From that, yes, correct.
Okay, great, gentlemen. We'll be pending on you and to help us watch this. Thanks so much, as always. Appreciate you being here.
Right.
Primetime Lawmakers not be seen tomorrow because of the Georgia General Assembly in recess. Coming up Thursday, it's day 40, Sine Die, the final day of the session. Many issues remain unresolved, including juvenile justice code revisions, one of the governor's legislative priorities. We'll have the highlights and all the latest news from under the Gold Dome. Thursday in Primetime Lawmakers at 7 and 11 p.m. We'll bring you special coverage of the final hour of the session. Live coverage of Thursday's session, the final session of the year, is available on our website, gpb.org/lawmakers. While you're there, check out our extended interviews and other videos. Legislative coverage available 24/7 at gpb.org/lawmakers. And as long as you're online, like us on Facebook. If you missed any part of this broadcast, catch the repeat tomorrow morning at 5:30 right here. Now, coming up next on GPB Georgia Outdoors, join host Sharon Collins at a journey down the Altamaha River, 137 miles from central Georgia to the Atlantic Ocean by kayak, motorboat, skiff, and shrimp boat. That's on Georgia Outdoors coming up next on GPB. As we leave you on the 39th legislative day of the 2012 session, you'll see the Georgia House debating the deadhead logging bill. Join us Thursday night at 7 and 11 right here.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it true that old refrigerators have not been buried for over 200 years with significant heavy metals above them? Isn't that true?
Original production.